Her knees hit the frozen ground first, then her hands. The shovel fell beside her, useless against earth that wouldn't break. Behind her, 5 children stood silent, watching their mother try to bury their father with bleeding fingers and a body that had nothing left to give. She didn't hear the horse, didn't hear the boots, only heard his voice low and steady, like something she'd forgotten existed. "Let me do that, ma'am." She looked up. A stranger. Another man. Another disappointment waiting to happen. But he was already taking off his coat. If you want to see how this broken woman finds her strength again, subscribe to our channel and follow this story to the very end. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We'd love to know how far this story travels. The shovel wouldn't break the ground. Clara McAllister drove it down again, her boot pressing hard on the blade's edge. Nothing. The earth was frozen solid, locked up tight like it was keeping secrets. "Mama," Will's voice behind her. 11 years old and already sounding like an old man. "Mama, it ain't gonna work." "It'll work." She lifted the shovel again. Her arms screamed. Her back had stopped screaming 3 hours ago now, it just burned quiet and mean. "It has to work." The shovel came down. Sparks flew where metal met frozen dirt. A crack no deeper than her thumbnail. "Mama." "William, I said it'll work." She didn't turn around. Couldn't. If she saw their faces one more time, Maggie's hollow eyes, Jake's trembling lip, Sarah clutching that ruined doll, baby Daniel whimpering against Will's chest, she'd fall apart. And falling apart wasn't something she could afford. Thomas McAllister had been dead for 6 days. He lay wrapped in an old tarp behind the barn, stiff and gray, waiting for a grave that his widow couldn't dig. The ground had frozen 3 days after he fell. Now she was racing against something worse than winter. "I can smell him, Mama." Jake, 7 years old, too young to understand, too young to say such things. From the house, when the wind comes from, "Jacob, hush." The shovel came down again, and again, and again. Nothing. Clara's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. Crying was a luxury. Crying was something women did when they had someone to wipe their faces after. She had no one. She had nothing. Just 5 children, a dead husband she didn't mourn, and 60 acres of frozen dirt that wouldn't even give her a hole to put him in. "Mama?" Maggie's voice now. 9 years old, quiet as a church mouse. "There's someone coming." Clara didn't stop. "Let them come." "Mama, there's a man on a horse." The shovel froze mid-swing. Clara turned slowly. Her hands were bleeding through the rags she'd wrapped around them. Her dress was stiff with old mud and older sweat. She probably looked like something the prairie had chewed up and spit out. Good. Let him see. The rider came over the ridge slow, like he had all the time in the world. A tall figure on a gray mare coat collar turned up against the wind. He stopped at the edge of their property line and just watched. Clara's jaw tightened. She knew what he saw. A broken fence, a falling down cabin, a woman too stubborn to quit and too poor to succeed. Another sad story on the frontier, the kind that ended with empty homesteads and unmarked graves. "Stay behind me," she said to the children without turning. "All of you." Will moved first, positioning himself between his siblings and the stranger. The boy had his father's hunting knife tucked in his belt. Clara had let him keep it after Thomas died. A child shouldn't need a knife, but children shouldn't need a lot of things they ended up needing anyway. The rider dismounted. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with broad shoulders and a face that had seen weather and war both. Dark hair graying at the temples, a scar running from his left temple to his jaw, old and silver in the weak winter light. He walked toward them slow. Clara gripped the shovel like a weapon. "That's far enough," she said when he was 20 feet away. He stopped, took off his hat, held it against his chest like he was at a funeral. Maybe he was. "Ma'am." His voice was low, rough, like gravel in a riverbed. "Name's Samuel Brennan. Got a ranch about 8 miles north." "Good for you." He didn't flinch at her tone, just nodded like rudeness was something he expected from women trying to bury their husbands in frozen ground. "I was riding the south fence line," he said. "Saw the smoke from your chimney 3 days ago. Been watching to see if it'd keep burning." "You been watching us?" "Watching the smoke." "Same thing." "No, ma'am, it ain't." He looked past her to the children, then to the tarp-wrapped body by the barn. His expression didn't change, but something moved behind his eyes. "That your husband—" Clara's grip tightened on the shovel. "What's it to you? Ground's frozen." "I'm aware. You won't break it with that shovel. Not by yourself. Not in this cold." "Then I'll wait till spring." The words came out sharp, brittle. She hated how desperate they sounded. How impossible. Samuel Brennan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the children again, really looked the way people don't when they're trying not to see. He saw Will's knife, Maggie's 2 old eyes, Jake's bare feet wrapped in grain sacks, Sarah's silent tears, the baby's thin wail. He saw all of it. And he didn't look away. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I got a wagon back at my place. Got tools that'll break this ground. Got a place you could wait while I do it somewhere warm." Clara's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "You think I don't know what that means? A stranger offering help? A warm place to wait. I think you know exactly what you're facing." His voice didn't rise, didn't push. "And I think you're too smart to die of pride when your children are standing right there watching." The wind picked up. Clara felt it cut through her thin dress, her worn shawl. Behind her, Sarah started to cry, not loud, just that soft, hopeless sound that children make when they've learned that crying doesn't bring help. "What do you want?" Clara asked. "Truth now. What do you actually want?" Samuel Brennan put his hat back on, looked her dead in the eye. "Nothing you ain't willing to give," he said. "And I ain't asking for a damn thing except the chance to help you bury that man so your children don't have to watch their mama freeze to death trying." Clara stared at him. Clara stared. She'd heard pretty words before. Thomas had been full of them once. Before the drinking. Before the fists. Before the long, terrible silence of a man who'd given up on everything, including himself. But this man wasn't offering pretty words. He was offering a shovel, a wagon, warmth, and he was asking for nothing. "Mama," Will's voice quiet. "Mama, Danny's real cold." Clara turned. The baby was blue-lipped, shivering in Will's arms. Her heart clenched so hard she couldn't breathe. She looked back at Samuel Brennan. "You try anything," she said, her voice low and deadly. "Anything at all, I will gut you like a fish and leave you for the coyotes. I've done it before. I'll do it again." She hadn't done it before. But she would. God help her, she would. Samuel nodded once. "Fair enough." He walked past her to the tarp-wrapped body, bent down, lifted Thomas McAllister like he weighed nothing, because he didn't, not anymore, not after 6 days of lying in the cold, and carried him to the mare. "I'll take him back to my place," Samuel said. "Ground's not frozen there. I built a fire pit last fall, keeps the earth soft enough to dig. I'll have a proper grave ready by nightfall." Clara's throat closed up. She wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, wanted to do it herself to prove she didn't need anyone, would never need anyone again. But her children were freezing, and she was so tired. "The children," she said. "They ride in your wagon. I'll walk." "Hell you will." Samuel secured the body across his horse's back. "You're dead on your feet. You'll ride or I'll put you on this horse myself and we can argue about it later." "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." They stared at each other. Something passed between them. Not warmth, not yet. Just recognition. Two people who had been broken by the world and were still standing anyway. Clara broke first. "Fine," she said. "We ride." Oh, the ranch was small but solid. A cabin with real glass windows, a barn that stood straight, fences that didn't lean, smoke curling from a chimney that drew proper. Clara stepped down from the wagon Samuel had brought it within the hour, just like he'd promised, and stood in the yard not moving. It was so much more than she had. "Cabin's through there," Samuel said, lifting Sarah down from the wagon bed. The girl clung to him for half a second before remembering herself and scrambling away. "Fire's lit. Stew's on. Nothing fancy, but it's hot." "You live alone?" Clara asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" He paused. "That's a long story." "I got time." He looked at her, and for the first time, something like a smile crossed his weathered face. "Maybe later. Get your children warm first." The cabin was everything their homestead wasn't. Tight walls, no drafts. A fire that actually heated the room instead of just making smoke. The children gravitated toward it like moths huddling close, holding out their hands. Jake was crying. Not sad crying, relieved crying. The kind that comes when you've been cold for so long, you forgot what warm felt like. Clara stood in the doorway, not entering. Samuel came up behind her carrying baby Daniel. He'd taken the child from Will without asking, and Will had let him too tired to argue. "He needs milk," Samuel said. "I've got a goat out back. Might be enough to get him through the night. I can nurse him." "Ma'am, no offense, but you look like you ain't eaten in a week. Your milk's probably not enough." Clara wanted to slap him, wanted to scream that she was a good mother, that she'd done everything right, that it wasn't her fault they were starving. But she couldn't, because it was true. "Fine," she said. "The goat." Samuel handed her the baby. Their hands touched brief, accidental. His were warm. Hers were still ice cold, even after the wagon ride. "I'm gonna go dig that grave," he said. "Take me a few hours. You rest. We'll talk after." "Talk about what?" He paused at the door. "About what happens next." "I know what happens next. We leave in the morning. Go back to our place." "That place won't make it through winter. It's my place. It's a death trap." His voice wasn't cruel, just honest. "You know it, I know it. Stay here a few days. Let me help you figure something out." "I don't need—" "I know." He cut her off. "You don't need anything from anyone. You've made that clear, but your children do. So maybe just this once you let someone help. Not for you, for them." He walked out before she could answer. Clara stood in the warm cabin, her children around her, a stranger's fire heating her frozen bones, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. She hated it. Samuel dug the grave by lantern light. The fire pit worked like he'd said it would. The ground beneath was soft enough to break, and he worked steady and slow the way a man does when he's done this before. He had done this before. Twice. His wife, his daughter. Both buried on the hill behind the barn marked with wooden crosses he'd carved himself. Mary Ellen had been 23 when the fever took her. Lily hadn't even made it to her first birthday. 6 years ago now. Sometimes it felt like yesterday. Sometimes it felt like someone else's life. He looked toward the cabin. Lamplight glowed in the windows. He could see shadows moving inside Clara, putting the children to bed probably. Getting them warm and fed for the first time in God knew how long. She was something, that woman. Most people would have broken by now. Lost a husband, lost their homestead, stuck with 5 children and no help, and a body they couldn't bury. Most people would have given up. Walked into town, begged for charity, or worse. Not her. She'd been digging frozen ground with bleeding hands. She'd threatened to gut him like a fish. She'd looked at him with eyes that had seen hell and decided hell wasn't allowed to win. Samuel drove the shovel deeper into the soft earth. He didn't know what he was doing. Didn't know why he'd stopped when he saw the smoke faltering 3 days ago. Didn't know why he'd ridden out today instead of minding his own business like he'd done for 6 years. But he knew this: he couldn't watch another woman die on this prairie. Couldn't watch another batch of children go hungry and cold while the world just kept on turning. Not again. Never again. Clara couldn't sleep. The children were piled on the bed, all 5 of them tangled together like puppies. They'd fallen asleep almost instantly, exhausted by warmth and food and the strange relief of being somewhere safe. She sat in the chair by the fire watching them breathe. Daniel's color was better already. The goat milk had helped. He'd drunk until his little belly was round, then passed out against her chest, peaceful for the first time in weeks. She should be grateful. She was grateful. But she was also terrified. Kindness came with strings. Always. Thomas had been kind at first, bringing her flowers, writing her poems, telling her she was the most beautiful woman in Ohio. Then they'd married, and the kindness dried up like a creek in summer, and what was left behind was something dark and angry that she hadn't seen coming until it was too late. Samuel Brennan seemed different, but they all seemed different at first. She heard his boots on the porch just past midnight. The door opened slowly, carefully, the way a man opens a door when he knows children are sleeping. "It's done," he said quietly. Clara stood. "I want to see. Now. Now." He didn't argue, just handed her a lantern and led the way. The grave was neat and deep, the dirt piled carefully beside it. Thomas's body lay at the bottom, still wrapped in the tarp. Clara looked down at the man she'd married 14 years ago. The man who'd promised her the world and given her bruises instead. The man who'd drunk himself mean and worked himself bitter and finally climbed a rafter he had no business climbing and solved all her problems in one terrible fall. She felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. She felt relief, and she hated herself for it. "You gonna say words?" Samuel asked. "No." He nodded, picked up the shovel, started filling in the grave without another question. Clara watched the dirt fall, watched her old life disappear one scoop at a time. "He hit me," she said. Samuel's shovel paused, then continued. "Started after the 3rd baby, got worse after each one. By the end I was praying he'd fall off that barn, praying every night." She laughed, bitter and broken. "Guess God was listening." "Guess so." "You think I'm terrible." "I think you survived." The shovel kept moving. "I think that's all that matters." Clara looked at him, really looked. The scar on his face. The way he moved, careful and deliberate. The sadness behind his eyes that he thought he was hiding. "Who'd you lose?" she asked. The shovel stopped. "You buried someone here," she said. "I can tell. The way you dug this grave, you've done it before. On this land." Samuel drove the shovel into the dirt pile, leaned on the handle. "Wife," he said. "Daughter. Fever. And whooping cough. Same winter, different weeks." Clara closed her eyes. "I'm sorry. It was 6 years ago. Doesn't matter. Still hurts." He looked at her then, and something passed between them, something raw and real. 2 people who had been hollowed out by loss and were still somehow standing. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It still hurts." They stood in silence while he finished filling the grave. When it was done, he found a flat stone big enough to mark the spot. "You want me to carve his name?" Clara thought about it. "No, just leave it blank. He doesn't deserve to be remembered." Samuel nodded, set the stone in place, and just like that, Thomas McAllister was gone. 10. They walked back to the cabin together. "I'll sleep in the barn," Samuel said at the door. "You take the bed with your children." "That's your bed." "I've slept worse places." Clara hesitated. "Mr. Brennan." "Samuel." Samuel. The name felt strange on her tongue. "Why are you doing this?" He stopped, turned to face her. "Because I was riding that fence line 6 years ago when my wife took sick," he said. "Because I was too far away to get help in time. Because I buried her and my baby girl alone in ground. I dug with my own hands, and nobody came. Nobody even knew." He paused. "I ain't letting that happen to someone else. Not if I can help it." Clara felt her throat tighten. "I can't pay you back," she said. "Didn't ask you to. I don't know how to—" "You don't have to know anything tonight." His voice was gentle. "Just sleep. Let your children sleep somewhere warm. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest." She nodded. Couldn't speak. He turned toward the barn. "Samuel." He stopped. "Thank you." He tipped his hat. "Good night, Mrs. McAllister." "Clara," she said. "My name is Clara." Something shifted in his face. Not a smile, but the possibility of one. "Good night, Clara." He disappeared into the dark. Clara stood on the porch a moment longer, watching the barn door close behind him. Then she went inside, lay down beside her sleeping children, and for the first time in 6 days, she slept. Morning came too fast. Clara woke to the sound of children whispering the kind of urgent, excited whispers that meant something had changed. She opened her eyes and found the bed empty beside her. All 5 children were crowded at the window breath fogging the glass. "Mama, look!" Jake's voice was bright. Too bright for a boy who'd spent the last week starving. "He's got chickens. Real chickens." Clara sat up slowly. Her body ached in places she'd forgotten existed. But she was warm and rested, which felt almost criminal given everything that had happened. She crossed to the window. Samuel was in the yard scattering feed from a bucket. A dozen hens pecked around his boots, clucking and fussing. He moved among them, easy, comfortable, like a man who'd done this same thing 1,000 mornings before. "Can we go see?" Jake asked, already bouncing on his toes. "Can we, Mama? Please." Clara hesitated. The children hadn't asked for anything in weeks. Not really. They'd learned that asking led to disappointment, that wanting things only made the not having worse. But Jake was asking now. "Go on," she said quietly. "But you mind your manners. All of you." They were out the door before she finished speaking. Even Will, who tried so hard to be grown, couldn't hide his excitement as he carried Daniel across the yard toward the chickens. Clara watched from the window. Samuel looked up as the children approached. He didn't startle, didn't seem surprised to see them tumbling toward him like puppies. He just stopped scattering feed and waited. Jake reached him first. "Mister, how many chickens you got?" 12. "That's a lot." "It's enough." Sarah crept closer, still clutching her ragged doll. She stopped a few feet away, watching the hens with wide eyes. One of them wandered toward her, pecking at the ground near her feet. She flinched. Samuel knelt down slow, the way you do when you don't want to scare something small and skittish. "That one's called Penny," he said. "She's friendly, won't hurt you." Sarah looked at him, then at the chicken, then back at him. Her lip trembled. "You want to feed her?" The girl nodded, just barely. Samuel poured a handful of feed into her tiny palm. "Hold your hand flat, like this. She'll eat right out of it." Sarah's whole body was tense as the chicken approached. Then Penny's beak dipped into her palm, gentle as a kiss, and the girl let out a sound Clara hadn't heard in months. Laughter. Clara's heart cracked right down the middle. She turned away from the window, pressing her hand to her chest. Breathe. Just breathe. She'd been so focused on keeping them alive that she'd forgotten what living looked like. Forgotten that children were supposed to laugh, supposed to want things, supposed to feed chickens and ask questions and bounce on their toes. She'd forgotten so much. The door opened behind her. She wiped her face quick, hoping her eyes weren't red. "Ma'am." Samuel's voice. "Clara." She turned. He stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable in his own home. "Children are fine," he said. "Will's watching them. I figured you and me ought to talk." "About what?" "About what happens next." Clara's spine stiffened. Here it came. The price. The catch. The thing he wanted in exchange for all this kindness. "I told you we're leaving today. Going back to our place. Your place won't make it through winter. You said that already. Because it's true. He didn't raise his voice, didn't push, just stated it like a fact, like weather or gravity. The roof's half gone. The walls ain't chinked proper. You got no food stored, no wood cut, no animals left. Your children will be dead by February. The words hit like a slap. Clara's hands curled into fists. You don't know that. I know this land. I know this winter. And I know what happens to folks who ain't prepared for it. He paused. I've buried enough of them to know. So what do you suggest? We stay here. Live off your charity. It ain't charity. Then what is it? Samuel took a breath, slow and deliberate, like a man choosing his words careful. I got 80 acres, he said. More than I can work alone. More than I need. The cabin's sound, the well's good, and there's enough stored to feed twice as many people through winter. He met her eyes. I'm asking you to stay, not as charity, as help. Mutual help. Clara stared at him. You want us to work for you? I want you to work with me. There's a difference. What kind of work? Whatever needs doing. Cooking, cleaning, mending. The children can help with the animals, the lighter chores. Come spring, I could use help with planting. He paused. You'd have a place to sleep, food to eat, safety. And what do you get out of it? His jaw tightened. Company. The word hung in the air between them. Company. 6 years alone on this ranch. 6 years of eating alone, sleeping alone, waking up to silence, and going to bed with nothing but his own thoughts for comfort. 6 years of watching the horizon and seeing nothing but empty land. Clara understood loneliness. She'd been lonely in her own marriage, lonely in a house full of children and a husband who looked right through her. But this was different. This was the loneliness of a man who had lost everything and built himself a fortress of solitude because the alternative hurt too much. I ain't looking for a wife, Samuel said, reading her face. Ain't looking for anything like that. He trailed off. It's been quiet for a long time. Clara didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to refuse, wanted to march back to that broken homestead and prove she could survive on her own, prove she didn't need anyone. But she had 5 children watching chickens in the yard, laughing for the first time in weeks, and she wasn't sure she had the right to say no. I need to think about it, she said. Take all the time you need. He put his hat back on and walked out. Clara stood alone in the warm cabin, surrounded by evidence of a life that worked. A home that held together a man who had figured out how to survive. She thought about her children. She thought about winter. She thought about pride. And she wondered which one she could afford to keep. The children came back for breakfast flushed and chattering. Even Will, who'd been carrying his father's knife like a weight since Thomas died, seemed lighter. He'd left the blade on the porch, Clara noticed. Not forgotten, just set aside. Like maybe he didn't need it here. Samuel made pancakes. Real pancakes, with flour and eggs and a little bit of honey he'd traded for last autumn. The children ate like they'd never seen food before, which wasn't far from the truth. Clara watched them. Maggie was talking. Actually talking, not just nodding or shaking her head. She was telling Samuel about the drawings she made in the dirt back home. The pictures she'd scratch out with sticks and then erase before anyone could see. Why'd you erase them? Samuel asked. Maggie shrugged, suddenly shy. They weren't good enough. Says who? Papa. The table went quiet. Clara's chest tightened. Thomas had opinions about everything the children did. Nothing was ever good enough, fast enough, quiet enough. He'd crushed their spirits one criticism at a time, so slow they didn't even notice until it was done. Samuel set down his fork. Well, he said carefully, your papa ain't here no more, and I'd like to see your drawings if you're willing. I bet they're better than you think. Maggie looked at Clara, asking permission. asking if it was safe to want something again. Clara nodded. Something in Maggie's face opened up like a flower turning toward the sun. "Okay," she whispered. "Maybe I'll draw you something." "I'd like that." Breakfast finished in easier silence. The children helped clear the table without being asked another thing they'd learned young, another survival skill they shouldn't have needed. Clara washed dishes while Samuel dried. They worked side by side without speaking, falling into a rhythm that felt strangely natural. "He was hard on them," Samuel said quietly. Not a question. "Yes." "On you too." Clara's hands stilled in the water. "Yes." "I figured." He set a plate on the shelf. "The way you flinch when someone moves too fast. The way you stand between them and any door. The way your boy carries that knife. Will's protective. Will's scared. There's a difference." Clara turned to look at him. "What do you want me to say? That my husband was a monster? That I stayed anyway? That I let my children grow up in a house where they had to learn when to hide and when to run?" "I don't want you to say anything." Samuel met her eyes. "I just want you to know that I see it. And I ain't gonna be like that. Not ever." She believed him. That was the terrifying part. She actually believed him. They spent the morning exploring the ranch, or rather the children explored, while Clara watched cataloging everything with a farmer's eye. The barn was solid, housing a milk cow, 2 draft horses, and the goat that had saved Daniel's life. A root cellar sat dug into the hillside, stocked with potatoes, carrots, and enough preserved meat to feed an army. A smokehouse stood behind the cabin, fragrant with last fall's venison. Samuel had built this place to last. "How long have you been here?" Clara asked as they walked the fence line. 8 years. Came out after the war." "Which side?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Does it matter?" "It might." "Confederate. Tennessee Regiment." He said it flat without pride or apology. "I was 18. Didn't know what I was fighting for. By the time I figured it out, it was too late to do anything but survive." Clara nodded slowly. She'd known men from both sides. Some good, some bad. The uniform didn't determine the man inside it. "Why'd you come west?" "Couldn't go home." Samuel stopped at a fence post checking the wire. "Too many ghosts, too many memories. Figured I'd start over somewhere nobody knew my name." "Did it work?" He looked at her. "Some days." They walked in silence for a while. The children had found a creek at the edge of the property and were poking at the ice with sticks, shouting every time it cracked. "Your wife," Clara said carefully. "What was she like?" Samuel's hands stilled on the fence wire. "Kind. Too kind for a place like this. She used to sing while she worked. Made everything feel lighter." He paused. "She would have liked you. You don't know me. I know you stayed." He turned to face her. "I know you dug frozen ground with your bare hands, trying to bury a man who didn't deserve your effort. I know you threatened to gut me for offering help. I know you look at your children like they're the only thing in this world worth living for." He paused. "That's enough." Clara didn't know what to say. No one had ever seen her before. Not really. Thomas had seen what he wanted to see: a pretty face, a strong back, a woman who would work without complaining. Her parents had seen a daughter, a responsibility, a mouth to feed. Even her children saw Mama, a role, a function. But Samuel saw her. It was terrifying. "I'll stay," she said before she could stop herself. "Through winter. We'll help however we can, and come spring, we'll reassess." Samuel nodded. "That's fair." "I have conditions." "Name them." "The children and I share the cabin. You stay in the barn." "Already planned on it." "No one touches me. No one touches my children." "I would never." "I know, but I need to say it anyway." He nodded slowly. "I understand. And if I decide to leave at any point for any reason, you don't try to stop me. You have my word." Clara extended her hand. "A business deal, a partnership, nothing more." Samuel shook it. His grip was firm but gentle, calloused, from work and weather. "Welcome to Brennan Creek," he said. Clara didn't smile. Not yet. But something in her chest loosened just a little. The first week was hard. Not the work Clara had worked hard her entire life. It was the strangeness of it. The unnatural peace. The absence of fear. She kept waiting for Samuel to change, to show his true face, to raise his voice or his hand to make demands to prove that kindness was just a mask for something uglier. But he didn't. He rose early every morning and had coffee ready by the time she woke. He worked alongside the children without complaint, teaching Will how to repair fence wire, showing Jake the proper way to muck a stall, letting Maggie help him feed the chickens, even when it took twice as long. He was patient. Clara didn't trust patience. In her experience, patient men were just waiting for the right moment to strike. But days passed, and that moment never came. One evening, she was mending a shirt by the fire when Samuel came in from the barn. His coat was dusted with hay, and he looked tired in a satisfied way, like a man who'd done good work and knew it. "Will's got a talent," he said, hanging his coat by the door. "Boy took apart that broken harness and put it back together better than I could. He's always been good with his hands." "He ask you yet?" Clara looked up. "Ask me what?" "If he can keep working with me. In the barn, with the horses." Her hands stilled on the needle. "No." "He wants to. I can tell. But he won't ask because he thinks you need him in the house." "I do need him. You need him to be a child." Samuel sat down across from her, his voice gentle. "Clara, that boy's been carrying weight no child should carry. Let me take some of it. Let him be 11 instead of trying to be 40. Clara's throat tightened. She looked down at the shirt in her hands, at the careful stitches she'd learned from her mother a lifetime ago. "His father used to hit him," she said quietly, "when Will tried to protect me. Thomas would. He'd say Will needed to learn his place. I'd never. I know." She looked up. "I know you wouldn't. But Will doesn't know that. Not yet. He's watching you, testing you, waiting for you to prove him wrong about men." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "Then I'll keep proving him wrong, every day, for as long as it takes." Something shifted in Clara's chest. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. "You can teach him," she said finally. "But if he comes to me scared or hurt or upset, then we stop. Immediately. No questions." Clara nodded. "Okay." Samuel stood. "I'll talk to him tomorrow. Let him know it's his choice." "Samuel." He stopped at the door. "Thank you. For seeing him. For seeing all of them." He nodded once, his face unreadable in the firelight. "Good night, Clara." "Good night." The door closed behind him. Clara sat alone listening to the fire crackle and her children breathe, and realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't bracing for impact. She was just sitting, just existing, just alive. It felt like a miracle. Will started working with Samuel the next day. Clara watched from the cabin window, her heart in her throat. Her son was out there with a man she barely knew, a man with tools and strength, and every opportunity to hurt if he chose. But what she saw through that glass wasn't violence. She saw Samuel showing Will how to hold a hammer properly, how to drive a nail straight, how to measure twice and cut once. She saw him demonstrate, then step back, then wait while Will tried. She saw her son fail, saw the nail bend, the board split. She saw Will's shoulders tense, bracing for the blow that always came when he made mistakes. It never came. Samuel just handed him another nail and said something Clara couldn't hear. Will's shoulders slowly relaxed. He tried again. This time the nail went in straight. Samuel clapped him on the shoulder, light friendly the way men do when they're proud, and Will flinched. Clara's hand went to her mouth. But Samuel didn't react. Didn't pull away. Didn't make it strange. He just kept his hand there steady and gentle until Will stopped flinching, until the boy's body remembered what safe touch felt like. Then he pointed at the next board, and they kept working. Clara turned away from the window, tears burning her eyes. She'd tried so hard to protect them, tried to be enough to stand between her children and their father's rage. But she hadn't been enough. She'd failed them over and over, every time Thomas raised his hand, every time she couldn't stop it. But maybe she could give them something now. Maybe she could give them this. A man who touched gently. A man who made mistakes into lessons instead of punishments. A man who waited for trust instead of demanding it. Maybe that was the only kind of redemption that mattered. The weeks blurred together. Snow fell and stopped and fell again. The world turned white and silent, but inside the cabin was warm and full. Clara cooked meals that actually satisfied, made from stores that actually lasted. The children grew stronger, louder, more themselves. Maggie started drawing again. Not in the dirt, but on paper Samuel found in a trunk from town. She drew the chickens, the horses, the ranch. She drew her siblings laughing. She drew Clara by the fire sewing. She didn't show anyone at first. But one evening, she left a drawing on Samuel's plate at dinner, a picture of him and Will working on the fence, stick figures, but somehow perfect. Samuel looked at it for a long time. "This is beautiful," he said quietly. Maggie flushed red. "It's not very good." "It's the best gift I've gotten in years." He pinned it to the wall by the door where he'd see it every time he came inside. Maggie didn't stop smiling for the rest of the night. Jake appointed himself assistant chicken keeper, a job he took with solemn seriousness. He named every hen, memorized their personalities, and reported each evening on their activities like a tiny town crier. "Penny laid 2 eggs today," he'd announce at dinner. "And Martha got in a fight with Josephine over a worm. Martha won." Sarah still didn't talk much, but she didn't cry as often either. She followed Samuel around the yard, sometimes watching him work, her ruined doll clutched to her chest. He never pushed her to speak, never made her feel strange for her silence. One day, Clara saw him carving something by the barn. A small thing, careful work. He didn't show anyone. But that night, Sarah found a tiny wooden horse on her pillow. 4 legs, a flowing mane, a little saddle etched into the back. She held it like it was made of gold. And when she looked at Samuel across the dinner table, something in her face changed. Not trust. Not yet. But the wall around her cracked just a little. Clara pretended not to notice. But she noticed. Baby Daniel learned to walk that winter. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. Clara was kneading bread, the children were scattered around the cabin, and Samuel was reading by the fire one of his few luxuries, a worn copy of something philosophical that Clara had never heard of. Daniel had been pulling himself up on furniture for weeks, tottering and falling and trying again with the stubborn persistence of all babies everywhere. Clara had stopped watching so closely, stopped bracing for every tumble. But then Jake shouted, "Mama, Mama, look!" Clara looked up. Daniel was standing in the middle of the room, not holding anything, just standing. Then he took a step, and another, and another. 5 steps. 6. 7. He made it all the way to Samuel's chair before his legs gave out, and he tumbled forward. Samuel caught him, lifted him up like it was nothing, like catching babies was just something he did, something natural, something he'd been doing all his life. Daniel laughed that pure, joyful baby laugh that sounds like the whole world is wonderful, and grabbed Samuel's nose with chubby fingers. "Well?" Samuel said, his voice rough with something Clara couldn't name. "Look at you, little man. Walking like you own the place." Clara's eyes were wet. She turned back to her bread, kneading hard, trying to swallow past the lump in her throat. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to feel safe here. Wasn't supposed to watch her children heal in a stranger's home. Wasn't supposed to see a man hold her baby like something precious. She wasn't supposed to feel her heart opening like a fist unclenching. But she did. God help her, she did. That night, after the children slept, Clara stepped out onto the porch. Samuel was already there, sitting on the steps, looking up at stars so bright they hurt. She sat down beside him. Neither of them spoke for a long time. "Thank you," she finally said. "For what?" "For giving them this. For letting them be children again." Samuel was quiet. Then, "They give me just as much." "What do you mean?" He looked at her. In the starlight, his face was all shadows and angles, but his eyes were soft. 6 years, Clara. 6 years of waking up alone in that cabin. 6 years of nothing but my own voice and the wind. I forgot what... He trailed off. I forgot what it felt like to matter to someone. Clara's breath caught. "You matter," she said quietly. "To them. To me." The words hung between them heavier than she'd meant them to be. Samuel turned back to the stars. "I'm glad you stayed." "I'm glad too." They sat in silence until the cold drove them inside. But something had changed, something had begun, and neither of them could pretend otherwise. Spring announced itself in small rebellions. Water dripping from the eaves, mud where there had been ice, birds returning to branches that had been silent for months. Clara woke one morning to birdsong and lay still listening, trying to remember the last time she'd noticed something so simple. The children noticed too. Jake burst through the door one afternoon, shouting about tadpoles in the creek. Maggie found wildflowers pushing through the last patches of snow and picked them carefully, presenting them to Clara like precious gems. Even Sarah ventured outside more often, her wooden horse clutched in one hand, while she explored the awakening land. Clara stood on the porch watching them scatter across the property like seeds finally finding good soil. Samuel came up beside her. "Ground's soft enough to turn." "Already?" "Another week, maybe 2. We should start planning what to plant." "We." The word caught her off guard every time he used it. After months of living parallel lives of careful distance and guarded conversations, he still said, "We," like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I don't know much about planting," she admitted. "Thomas always handled the fields. I did the kitchen garden, but that was small. Nothing like this." "Then I'll teach you. Same as I taught Will the fence work." Clara turned to look at him. He was watching the children. Not her. His face relaxed in a way she'd learned to recognize as contentment. "You've taught us all so much," she said quietly. "I don't know how we'll ever repay you." Samuel shook his head. "I told you from the start, it ain't about repayment." "Then what is it about?" He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "It's about not being alone anymore. It's about having a reason to get up in the morning that ain't just survival." He paused. "It's about watching your boy learn to trust again, watching your girl start to talk, watching that baby take his first steps in my front room like he belonged there." Clara's throat tightened. "We do belong here," she said. The words came out before she could stop them, surprising them both. "At least, it feels that way. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm somewhere I'm supposed to be." Samuel turned to look at her then. Really look. His eyes searched her face, looking for something Clara couldn't name. "Clara," he said slowly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart stuttered. Here it came. The catch. The price. The moment everything changed. "What is it?" He stopped, took a breath. "I've been alone a long time. I convinced myself I was fine with it, that I didn't need anyone, that keeping people at a distance was the only way to survive. I understand that. I know you do. That's part of why I'm saying this." He turned to face her fully. "These past months having you and the children here, it's changed something in me. Something I thought was dead." Clara couldn't breathe. I ain't asking for anything. Samuel continued quickly. I don't expect anything. I needed you to know. Whatever happens come spring, whatever you decide to do, I wanted you to know that you saved me just as much as I helped you. The words hung in the air between them. Clara didn't know what to say, didn't know what to feel. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Samuel. You don't have to say anything. I probably shouldn't have said it at all. Samuel. He stopped. Clara reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough, calloused, warm. They curled around hers like they'd been waiting their whole life to do exactly that. I know, she said softly. I feel it too. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They just stood there, hand in hand, watching the children play in the spring sunshine. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise. It was just two people acknowledging something true. And for now, that was enough. The planting started the following week. Samuel hitched the horses to the plow, while Clara organized the seeds they'd saved from last year's harvest. Corn, beans, squash, wheat. Enough to feed them through another winter if everything went right. If. Clara had learned not to trust if. If meant hoping, and hoping meant disappointment. But standing in the soft spring earth with dirt under her fingernails and sun on her face, she felt something dangerous stirring in her chest. She felt hopeful anyway. Will worked alongside Samuel, guiding the horses while Samuel handled the plow. The boy had grown over the winter, not just in height, but in presence. He held himself differently now, straighter, more confident. The knife had been returned to the kitchen drawer weeks ago, unnecessary in a house where no one needed defending. He's good with those horses, Clara said to Maggie, who was helping her sort seeds. Maggie nodded. Samuel says he's a natural. Says Will could train horses professionally if he wanted. Samuel said that last week, when they were working on the new harness. Maggie glanced up at her mother. Will smiled, Mama. Really smiled. I don't remember the last time I saw him do that. Clara didn't either. She watched her son guide the horses through another furrow, his young face focused and serious, but not tight, not scared. Just determined, the way an 11-year-old should look when he's learning something new. Mama. Maggie's voice was hesitant. Yes, sweetheart. Are we staying? Clara's hand stilled on the seeds. What do you mean? You said we'd stay through winter. Winter's over now. Maggie's eyes were too old, too knowing. Are we going back to the old place? Clara looked at her daughter, at the color in her cheeks that hadn't been there 6 months ago, at the drawings tucked into her apron pocket, ready to be worked on whenever she had a spare moment, at the life that had returned to her face. Do you want to go back? Clara asked. Maggie shook her head quickly. No, never. I like it here. I like the chickens and the horses and... She hesitated. I like Samuel. He's kind. He is kind. Papa wasn't kind. Clara's chest ached. No, baby. He wasn't. Samuel's different. Maggie looked toward the field where Samuel was showing Will how to adjust the plow blade. He's different from any man I ever met. I know. So are we staying? Clara took a deep breath. I think so. Yes, I think we're staying. Maggie's face broke into a smile so bright it hurt to look at. She threw her arms around Clara's waist, squeezing tight. Thank you, Mama. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Clara held her daughter close and blinked back tears. Staying. They were staying. News of their arrangement traveled slowly, but inevitably. The frontier had no secrets. Ranches were isolated, but people talked. Merchants passed through. Travelers stopped for water. And by late spring, Cedar Hollow knew all about the widow living on Samuel Brennan's ranch with her 5 children. Clara found out what people were saying when she went to town for supplies. She'd taken the wagon alone, leaving the children with Samuel. It was the first time she'd been off the ranch since winter, and the ride into Cedar Hollow felt strange, like returning to a world she'd almost forgotten existed. The general store was quiet when she entered. Two women stood by the fabric bolts, heads together, whispering. They stopped when they saw her. Clara recognized the look on their faces. She'd seen it before in other towns, other stores. Judgment, suspicion, the particular cruelty women reserve for other women who don't follow the rules. "Morning," Clara said evenly. One of the women nodded curtly. The other didn't acknowledge her at all. Clara gathered her supplies in silence. Flour, salt, coffee, a length of cloth for new shirts the boys had outgrown. She brought everything to the counter where the shopkeeper, a thin man with suspicious eyes, tallied her purchases. "Put it on the Brennan account," Clara said. The whispers behind her intensified. "Heard you're living out at his place," the shopkeeper said, his voice carrying. "You and all them children." "That's right." "Heard you ain't married?" Clara's jaw tightened. "Is there a problem with my credit?" "No, ma'am. Just making conversation." "Then maybe you could make it about something else." The shopkeeper's eyes narrowed, but he finished the transaction without another word. Clara gathered her packages and turned to leave. One of the women stepped into her path. "I don't know what kind of arrangement you've got with Samuel Brennan," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "But there are decent people in this town, decent families. We don't hold with that kind of thing." Clara looked at her. Really looked. The woman was maybe 40, well-dressed, well-fed. Probably never gone hungry a day in her life. Probably never had to choose between her pride and her children's survival. "What kind of thing would that be?" Clara asked quietly. "You know exactly what I mean. Living with a man who ain't your husband, letting your children see that kind of sin." Something cold settled in Clara's chest. "My children are fed, they're warm, they're safe. They're learning and growing and healing from things you couldn't begin to understand. If that's sin, then I'll answer for it gladly." The woman's face reddened. "Well, I never—" "No, you probably haven't." Clara stepped around her. "Good day." She walked out of the store with her head high, but her hands were shaking by the time she reached the wagon. The ride home was long and quiet. By the time Clara pulled into the yard, she'd made a decision. She wasn't going to tell Samuel about the women in the store. Wasn't going to burden him with the ugliness of small minds and smaller hearts. But Samuel was waiting on the porch, and one look at her face told him everything. "What happened?" Clara climbed down from the wagon. "Nothing I can't handle." "Clara." She stopped, looked at him. The concern in his eyes was real, and it undid something in her. "Town knows about us," she said flatly. "About our arrangement. They have opinions." Samuel's jaw tightened. "What kind of opinions?" "The kind that come with words like sin and decent people." "Who said that to you?" "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." Clara shook her head. "Samuel, I've dealt with gossip my whole life. Women like that, they've got nothing better to do than tear down anyone who doesn't fit their narrow little idea of respectable. I won't give them the satisfaction of caring." Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped closer. "There's a way to stop the talk," he said carefully. Clara's heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" "I mean—" He took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. "I mean, we could make it official, legal. Stop giving them anything to talk about." Clara stared at him. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking if you'd consider it, someday, when you're ready. If you're ever ready." He met her eyes. "I ain't proposing proper. I know it's too soon for that. I just want you to know that the option exists, that I'd be honored if you—" "Samuel." He stopped. Clara stepped forward, took his hands in hers. They were shaking slightly, both of them. "I spent 14 years married to a man who made me feel small," she said. "Who made me feel worthless. Who made me think I deserved every bad thing that happened to me? She paused. You've spent 6 months showing me that's not true. Showing my children that men can be gentle, that home can be safe, that trust isn't just another word for trap. Samuel's grip tightened on her hands. I'm not ready yet, Clara continued. Not for a wedding, not for promises. But I'm not saying no. I'm saying, not yet. I'm saying, let me catch my breath. Let me learn what it feels like to want something for myself, instead of just surviving. I can wait. I know you can. That's why I trust you. She rose up on her toes and kissed his cheek. Brief. Gentle. The first time she'd initiated any kind of touch between them. Samuel closed his eyes like he was memorizing the moment. Take all the time you need, he said quietly. I ain't going anywhere. Clara stepped back. Neither am I. That night after the children were asleep, Clara walked to the hill behind the barn. She'd avoided this place all winter knowing what was there. 2 wooden crosses, weathered by time and neglect. Mary Ellen Brennan, Lily Brennan, wife and daughter taken in the same terrible season. Clara knelt between them. I know you don't know me, she said to the quiet graves, and I know this must seem strange me coming out here. But I needed to say something. The wind rustled through the new grass. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. He's a good man, your husband, the father of your baby. He's been carrying your memory like a weight around his neck for 6 years, and I think... Clara's voice caught. I think maybe it's time for him to set it down. Not forget you, never that. Just stop punishing himself for not being able to save you. She touched the smaller cross. Lily. A baby who never got to grow up. I have a baby too. Daniel. He's 10 months old now, walking everywhere, getting into everything. Samuel caught him trying to climb the woodpile yesterday. You should have seen his face. She smiled through her tears. He would have been a wonderful father to your girl. I know that doesn't help. I know nothing can make it better. But I wanted you to know that the love he would have given her, he's giving it now. To my children. To me. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I'll take care of him, she whispered. I promise. Whatever happens, I'll take care of him. She stayed there a while longer, sitting with the dead, making peace with the past. When she finally walked back to the cabin, Samuel was standing on the porch watching for her. He didn't ask where she'd been. He already knew. Summer came in full and fierce. Long days of work, longer evenings of rest. The crops grew tall. The children grew taller. Even Daniel, who had been so small and sickly when they arrived, became round and healthy and loud. Clara watched her family thrive and felt something she'd almost forgotten how to name. Joy. It came in small moments. Jake making Samuel laugh with some ridiculous story about the chickens. Maggie showing off a new drawing beaming when Samuel praised it. Sarah actually speaking full sentences, sometimes telling Clara about the butterflies she'd seen by the creek. And Will. Will, who had carried the weight of the world for so long, finally started to put it down. He laughed now, teased his siblings, challenged Samuel to races across the fields, and lost gloriously, grinning the whole time. One afternoon, Clara found them in the barn together, Samuel teaching Will how to gentle a horse. Slow, Samuel was saying, his voice low and calm. Let her come to you. Don't force it. Will had his hand extended palm flat, waiting. The mare, a skittish young thing Samuel had bought from a neighbor, watched him with wary eyes. She's scared, Will said. She's been hurt. Someone was rough with her before. Takes time to trust again. How much time? As long as it takes. The mare took a step forward, then another. Her nose touched Will's palm, soft and curious. Will's face transformed. Pure, uncomplicated joy, the kind Clara hadn't seen since he was very young. I did it, he breathed. You did. Samuel clapped him on the shoulder. "Now do it again tomorrow. And the day after. And the day after that. Trust ain't built in a day." Clara stepped back from the barn door, not wanting to intrude. But Samuel had seen her. He met her eyes across the dusty space, and something passed between them. Understanding. Gratitude. The quiet acknowledgement of healing witnessed. She nodded once. He nodded back. And life continued. The shift happened on a Thursday evening. Clara was cooking dinner, the cabin full of good smells and children's voices. Samuel came in from the fields, dusty and tired, same as always. But something was different. He stopped in the doorway, watched her move around the kitchen, watched the children set the table, arguing cheerfully about whose turn it was to sit where. "What?" Clara asked, catching his eye. "Nothing." He took off his hat. "Just looking." "At what?" "At my family." The word landed like a stone in still water. Family. Not you and your children. Not the widow and her brood. Family. Clara set down the ladle. Her heart was pounding. "Say that again." Samuel crossed the room, stopped in front of her, took her hands. "My family," he said again, quiet but certain. "If you'll have me." Clara looked at him, at this man who had pulled her from the edge of destruction, who had taught her children to trust again, who had waited patient as stone for her to find her own way to him. "Yes," she said. "Yes. Yes. I'll have you. We'll have you." She glanced at the children who had gone suspiciously quiet. "If they agree." 5 faces turned toward them. Jake's mouth was hanging open. Maggie was grinning. Sarah clutched her wooden horse. Will stood very still, watching with eyes that saw everything. "Will," Clara asked softly, "what do you think?" Her eldest son looked at Samuel for a long moment, then at his mother, then at his siblings. "I think," he said slowly, "that we've been a family for a while now. Might as well make it official." Jake whooped. Maggie clapped her hands. Sarah smiled, actually smiled, and held up her wooden horse like it was celebrating too. Daniel, not understanding, but sensing excitement, banged his spoon on his chair. Samuel laughed. Actually laughed free and full, the sound of a man who'd spent 6 years in silence finally finding his voice again. He pulled Clara close. She let him. For the first time in her life, she let someone hold her without fear. "We'll do it proper," Samuel said against her hair. "Church wedding. The whole town can come and choke on their gossip." Clara laughed through her tears. "I'd like that. Next month." "Next month." He pulled back to look at her face. "You sure I don't want to rush?" "I'm sure." She touched his cheek, the scar there silver and old, the lines around his eyes that came from squinting into the sun, the face of a good man who had waited so long for someone to love again. "I'm sure," she said again. And she was. That night Clara lay in bed listening to her children breathe. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more opportunities to mess this up. The town would talk. Her brother-in-law in Ohio would eventually hear where she'd ended up. The past had a way of following people no matter how far they ran. But for now, in this moment, everything was exactly right. She had a home. She had a family. She had a man who loved her. And for the first time in her entire life, Clara McAllister fell asleep without fear. The letter arrived 3 weeks before the wedding. Clara was hanging wash when Will came running from the road, an envelope clutched in his fist. His face was pale the way it used to get back when Thomas was alive, and something bad was coming. "Mama!" He was out of breath. "The mail rider just came. This is for you." Clara took the envelope. Her name was written in careful script, the kind taught in Eastern schools. The return address made her blood run cold. Reverend Ezra Whitfield, Columbus, Ohio. Her dead sister's husband. "Mama!" Will's voice was thin. "Who's it from?" "Go find Samuel." "But now, Will." He ran. Clara's hands shook as she opened the envelope. The letter inside was 2 pages dense with small, precise handwriting. She read it twice before the words stopped swimming. Dear Clara, it has come to my attention that you are living in sin with a man in Colorado territory. Furthermore, I have learned that my late wife's sister has been raising 5 children in conditions of moral degradation that no Christian woman should countenance. As the children's nearest male relative and a man of God, I have a sacred duty to intervene. I will be arriving in Cedar Hollow on the 15th of next month to assess the situation, and if necessary, take custody of the children and return them to civilization where they can be raised properly. Do not attempt to flee. I have already contacted the territorial authorities. The law is on my side. Your brother-in-law, Reverend Ezra Whitfield. Clara read it a 3rd time. Then she sat down hard on the porch steps, the letter crumpling in her fist. Samuel found her there 5 minutes later, still staring at nothing. Clara. He knelt in front of her, took her hands. Clara, what is it? Will said something's wrong. She couldn't speak, just handed him the letter. She watched his face as he read, watched it go from concern to confusion to cold, hard anger. Who is this man? My sister's husband. Margaret died 3 years ago. Childbirth. Clara's voice was flat, distant. Ezra was always difficult, controlling. He didn't approve of Thomas, didn't approve of me leaving Ohio. We haven't spoken since Margaret's funeral. And now he wants your children. He wants to punish me. That's what this is about. He never cared about the children when Margaret was alive. Never visited, never wrote. But now that I'm happy, now that I've found something good, he can't stand it. Samuel's jaw tightened. He's got no claim. He says he has papers. He says the law, to hell with his papers. Samuel stood pacing. You're their mother. You've raised them alone for years. You've kept them alive when any lesser woman would have given up. No judge in his right mind would take them from you. You don't know Ezra. Clara looked up at him, fear making her voice sharp. He's a preacher, respected, educated. He knows people, important people, and I'm just a widow living with a man out of wedlock. Then we get married, now, today, before he arrives. Will that matter? It might. Samuel knelt again, taking her face in his hands. Clara, listen to me. I won't let him take your children. I won't let anyone take them. Whatever it costs, whatever I have to do, they're staying with us. Do you understand? Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love and determination were enough to win against a man like Ezra. But she'd believed before. And belief hadn't stopped Thomas's fists, hadn't kept her children fed, hadn't prevented any of the 1,000 small tragedies that made up her life. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. Samuel pulled her close. I'm scared too. But we're not alone anymore. Neither of us. We face this together. Clara buried her face in his chest and held on tight. Together. She had to believe that together would be enough. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Samuel rode into town and came back with a marriage license. They were wed 3 days later in the cabin's front room with only the children as witnesses. The ceremony was brief, the vows simple, but when Samuel slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, something settled in her chest like an anchor finding bottom. She was Clara Brennan now. It had to matter. It had to count for something. Meanwhile, Samuel talked to everyone he knew, the sheriff, the doctor, the few ranchers nearby who'd treated him fairly over the years. He told them what was coming and asked them to speak on Clara's behalf if needed. She's a good mother, he said over and over. The best I've ever seen. Anyone who tries to say otherwise is lying. Some people agreed to help. Others looked away uncomfortable with taking sides. And a few the same women who'd confronted Clara in the general store smiled thin, satisfied smiles that made Clara's stomach turn. They want him to win, she told Samuel one night. The gossips. They want him to take the children. It proves they were right about me all along. They don't matter. They might. If Ezra calls them as witnesses, then we'll call our own witnesses. People who've seen you with those kids. People who know what kind of mother you are. Samuel pulled her close. We're not beaten yet, Clara. Not by a long shot. She tried to believe him, but every night she dreamed of Ezra's cold eyes and woke up shaking. He arrived on a Tuesday. Clara was in the garden when she heard the buggy. A fine one, black and polished, pulled by matched horses that had no business on a frontier road. It stopped at the edge of the property, and a man stepped down. Ezra Whitfield looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, thin, impeccably dressed in black. His face was pale and sharp, like something carved from marble. He carried a Bible in one hand and righteousness in every line of his body. Clara straightened, wiped her hands on her apron, walked toward him with her head high. Ezra? Clara. His voice was cold, disapproving. You look weathered. It's been a hard year. So I've heard. His eyes swept the property, the cabin, the barn, taking inventory. This is where you've been hiding. I haven't been hiding. I've been living. Living in sin. Living, period. Which is more than I'd be doing if I'd stayed in Ohio waiting for your approval. Ezra's lips pressed into a thin line. I see your time in the wilderness hasn't improved your manners. And your time behind the pulpit hasn't improved your compassion. They stared at each other. Years of resentment and distrust hung between them like smoke. I've come for the children, Ezra said finally. You know that. They're not yours to take. The law says otherwise. The law says you can make a claim. It doesn't say you'll win. Ezra smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. We'll see about that. Samuel appeared from the barn, his face set in hard lines. He stopped beside Clara, close enough that their shoulders touched. You must be the Reverend, he said. His voice was calm, but Clara could hear the steel underneath. And you must be the man who's been defiling my sister-in-law. I'm her husband, actually. We were married last week. Something flickered in Ezra's eyes. Surprise quickly hidden. How convenient. It's legal, recorded at the county seat. Whatever claim you thought you had, it doesn't hold anymore. Marriage doesn't erase sin, Mr. Brennan. These children have spent months in an immoral household. They've been exposed to behavior that no decent Christian family would tolerate. They've been exposed to food, warmth, safety, and love. Samuel stepped forward. Which is more than they had when their father was alive, from what I understand. Ezra's face tightened. Thomas McAllister was a troubled man, but he was their father. He had rights. He had fists. Clara's voice was sharp. He had a temper and a bottle and no interest in anything except making our lives miserable. Don't you dare stand there and defend him. I'm not defending him. I'm simply pointing out that you chose him. You chose to marry him, to bear his children, to stay with him despite his difficulties. That speaks to your judgment, Clara. Your character. My character? Clara laughed, harsh and broken. I survived him. I kept those children alive while he drank himself to death. I buried him with my own hands. And now I've built something new, something good, and you want to destroy it, because you can't stand the thought of me being happy. I want to save those children's souls. Their souls don't need saving. They need stability. They need love. They need to stay with their mother. Ezra shook his head slowly. We'll let the judge decide that. Fine. Samuel stepped between them. You want a hearing, you'll get one. But I promise you this, Reverend. If you try to take these children, you'll face the fight of your life. Clara's not alone anymore. She's got me, she's got this community, and she's got the truth on her side. Ezra looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled again, that cold, calculating smile. We'll see, he said. The hearing is set for Friday. I've already spoken with the judge. He turned and walked back to his buggy. climbed up, took the reins. "Friday, Clara," he called over his shoulder. "I'll see you then." The buggy pulled away, dust rising behind it like a bad omen. Clara felt Samuel's arm around her shoulder, steady and strong. But her heart was racing, and she couldn't make it stop. The days before the hearing passed in a nightmare haze. Clara couldn't eat, could barely sleep. She watched her children with desperate eyes, memorizing their faces, their voices, their laughs, just in case. Will knew something was wrong. He was too smart, too observant to miss the tension. "Mama!" He found her alone on the porch one evening, staring at nothing. "What's going to happen on Friday?" Clara considered lying, considered protecting him from the truth, the way she'd tried to protect him from so many things. But Will was 11 now, almost 12. He'd carried his father's knife. He'd stood between her and danger more times than she could count. He deserved the truth. "A man is trying to take you away from me," she said quietly. "Your Uncle Ezra. He thinks he knows what's best for you better than I do." Will's face went hard. "He can't do that." "He's going to try." "I won't go. None of us will go. You can't make us." Clara pulled him close, holding tight. "I know, baby, I know. But the law might not care what you want. The law might decide that a preacher with a big church and fancy clothes knows better than a woman who's spent her whole life fighting just to survive. That's not fair." "No, it's not." Will was quiet for a moment. Then, "What can I do? What do you mean? To help? What can I do to help?" He pulled back to look at her, his young face fierce. "I'm not a kid anymore, Mama. I can fight. I can—" "No." Clara's voice was firm. "No fighting. No knives. No violence. That's not how we win this." "Then how—" She touched his face. Her beautiful boy who'd grown up too fast in a house full of fear. "We tell the truth," she said. "We show them who we really are. And we trust that somewhere out there, someone will see it." Will nodded slowly. "Okay. Okay. Okay. We tell the truth." He straightened his shoulders. "And if that doesn't work, I'll think of something else." Despite everything, Clara smiled. "That's my boy." Friday came too fast. The hearing was held in the back room of the general store, the closest thing Cedar Hollow had to a courthouse. Judge Harrison, a weathered man who rode a circuit through the territory, sat behind a makeshift bench. Ezra stood on one side, Bible in hand. Clara and Samuel stood on the other, the children arranged behind them like soldiers in a war they didn't understand. The room was packed. Half the town had come to watch. Clara saw the women who'd confronted her months ago, their faces eager with anticipation. But she also saw others. The shopkeeper's wife who'd slipped her extra flour once without comment. The doctor who'd checked on Daniel last month and refused payment. The ranchers Samuel had helped over the years, their faces set in supportive scowls. She wasn't alone. She had to remember that. "We're here to determine custody of the minor children of the late Thomas McAllister." Judge Harrison began, his voice tired but not unkind. "Reverend Whitfield, you filed a claim. State your case." Ezra stepped forward, his voice ringing with practiced authority. "Your Honor, I am the nearest male relative to these children. Their mother has proven herself unfit to raise them. She lived for months with a man outside of marriage, exposing them to moral corruption. She has no stable income, no standing in this community, and no ability to provide the structure and discipline these children desperately need. They were married last week," Judge Harrison pointed out. "A convenient arrangement made solely to circumvent this hearing. It speaks to her cunning, not her character." Clara's hands clenched at her sides. Samuel's arm pressed against hers, steadying. "Furthermore," Ezra continued, "I have spoken with several members of this community who confirm that Mrs." He paused, distaste evident. "Brennan has been living in scandal for months. These children deserve better. They deserve a Christian home, a stable environment, proper education. I can provide all of these things." Judge Harrison nodded slowly. Mrs. Brennan, your response. Clara stepped forward. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own voice. Your Honor, I have been these children's mother for their entire lives. I nursed them, fed them, clothed them, protected them. When their father drank himself into rages, I stood between them and his fists. When there wasn't enough food, I went hungry so they could eat. When he died, I buried him alone and kept going because that's what mothers do. She paused, steadying herself. Reverend Whitfield never visited, never wrote, never sent a single penny to help when we were starving. He didn't care about these children when they were suffering. He only cares now because he can't stand to see me happy. That's a lie, Ezra interrupted. Is it? When did you last write to them, Reverend? When did you last ask about their health, their schooling, their well-being? Ezra's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. I may not have much. Clara continued, turning back to the judge. I may not have a big church or fancy clothes or important friends, but I have loved these children every single day of their lives. I have fought for them, bled for them, sacrificed everything for them. And Samuel Brennan, my husband, has done the same for the past 7 months. He's taught my son to work with horses. He's helped my daughter find her voice. He's held my baby when he cried and never once asked for anything in return. She felt tears on her cheeks but didn't wipe them away. These children don't need saving, Your Honor. They need their mother. They need their home. Please don't take that away from them. The room was silent. Judge Harrison looked at her for a long moment, then at Ezra, then at the children. I'd like to hear from the children themselves, he said. Starting with the eldest. William, is it? Will stepped forward. He was pale but steady. Yes, sir. You're 11 years old. Almost 12, sir. Old enough to have opinions. Tell me, son, do you want to go with your uncle? Will looked at Ezra, then at his mother, then back at the judge. No, sir. Why not? Because he doesn't know us. Will's voice was strong, surprising everyone. He never came to see us, never helped when when things were bad. He's a stranger. Mama's not a stranger. Samuel's not a stranger. They're our family. Your uncle is family too. Family doesn't just mean blood. Will glanced at Samuel. Family means the people who stay, the people who show up, the people who love you even when it's hard. Judge Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. That's a very mature perspective. I've had to be mature, sir. Someone had to take care of my brother and sisters when the grown-ups couldn't. The room was utterly silent. Clara's heart swelled with pride and broke with sorrow at the same time. Her boy. Her beautiful, wounded, brave boy. Judge Harrison turned to Ezra. Reverend, you've made claims about this household's morality, but I've just heard a child speak more wisdom than most adults manage in a lifetime. And I've seen the way these children look at their mother and stepfather. That's not the look of children being corrupted. That's the look of children who feel safe. Your Honor. I'm not finished. The judge's voice sharpened. I've also heard from several members of this community. Dr. Abernathy tells me these children have been receiving proper care. The sheriff tells me there's been no trouble at the Brennan Ranch, and 3 separate ranchers have testified that Samuel Brennan is a man of honor and integrity. He paused. I'm dismissing your petition, Reverend Whitfield. These children will remain with their mother. Clara's knees nearly buckled. Samuel caught her arm, holding her upright. This isn't over, Ezra hissed. I'll appeal. You'll do nothing of the kind. Judge Harrison stood, his voice final. And if I hear you've been harassing this family, I'll have you escorted out of the territory. Am I clear? Ezra's face was white with rage, but he nodded once, sharp as a blade. This court is adjourned. The room erupted. People were talking, moving, congratulating. Clara couldn't process any of it. She just stood there shaking until Samuel wrapped his arms around her. It's over, he said against her hair. Clara, it's over. They're safe. She looked at her children. Will was grinning, actually grinning. Maggie was crying happy tears. Jake was bouncing on his toes. Sarah clutched her wooden horse and smiled. Daniel held in Mrs. Harriet Cole's arms, reached for Clara with chubby fingers. She took him, held him close, breathed in the smell of his hair. "We're going home," she whispered. "All of us. Together." And for the first time since the letter arrived, she believed it. The ride back to the ranch was quiet but light. The children fell asleep one by one, exhausted by emotion, draped over each other in the wagon bed like puppies. Clara sat beside Samuel on the bench, her head on his shoulder, watching the land roll by. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what? For standing with me. For not giving up. For being the kind of man who fights for people instead of against them." Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then, "I should be thanking you." "Me for what?" "For giving me something to fight for." He looked at her, his face soft in the fading light. "I was dead, Clara. Inside, I mean. Walking around working, breathing, but dead. You brought me back to life." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "We brought each other back." He kissed her forehead. "I suppose we did." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence. But when the ranch came into view, Clara sat up suddenly. Something was wrong. She felt it before she saw it. A wrongness in the air, a tension that hadn't been there when they left. Samuel. He'd felt it too. His hands tightened on the reins. Then they saw the smoke. Not from the chimney. From the barn. The barn was on fire. Samuel whipped the horses forward, the wagon lurching and bouncing over the rough road. Clara held on her heart in her throat, watching the flames rise higher and higher against the darkening sky. By the time they reached the yard, the barn was fully engulfed. The horses were screaming, the chickens were scattered, panicked, and standing in the middle of it all, watching the destruction with cold satisfaction, was Ezra Whitfield. "No," Clara breathed. Samuel was off the wagon before it stopped moving. "What did you do?" Ezra turned to face them. His fine black coat was spotted with ash. His eyes were wild, triumphant. "An accident," he said. "A terrible accident. These frontier properties are so dangerous. Perhaps the judge should have considered that before leaving those children in such a hazardous environment." Samuel lunged at him. Clara screamed his name, but it was too late. The two men crashed to the ground, grappling in the dirt. Ezra was taller, but Samuel was stronger. His body hardened by years of ranch work. They rolled across the yard, punching, kicking, fighting with a ferocity that made Clara's blood run cold. "Stop it!" she screamed. "Both of you stop." But they didn't stop. Couldn't stop. And behind them, the barn kept burning, taking with it everything they'd built, everything they'd saved, everything they'd dreamed. Then a gunshot split the air. Everyone froze. Sheriff Marcus Holloway stood at the edge of the property, his pistol pointed at the sky, smoke curling from the barrel. "That's enough," he said. "Both of you on your feet." Samuel stood slowly, his lips split, his eye already swelling. Ezra rose too, his fine clothes torn, his face bloody. "He burned my barn," Samuel said, his voice shaking with rage. "He burned it out of spite. I did no such thing." Ezra wiped blood from his mouth. "I was simply passing by when I saw the flames. I stopped to help." "Liar. You were standing there watching it burn. Your word against mine, Mr. Brennan." The sheriff looked between them, then at the burning barn, then at Clara and the children huddled in the wagon, their faces pale with fear. "Reverend," he said slowly, "I think you'd better come with me." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that 3 different people saw you buying kerosene in town this afternoon. On the grounds that you told the shopkeeper, and I quote, 'Some lessons have to be taught the hard way.'" The sheriff's voice hardened. "On the grounds that I don't take kindly to men who burn down barns to punish women for winning custody cases." Ezra's face went white. "This is an outrage. I'm a man of God. You're a man who just committed arson, and in this territory that's a hanging offense. He grabbed Ezra by the arm and dragged him toward his horse. Clara watched them go, her whole body shaking. She felt Samuel's arms around her, pulling her close, but she couldn't stop watching until Ezra was out of sight. Then she turned to the barn. It was gone. All of it. The horses, the cow, the goat that had saved Daniel's life. The tools Samuel had collected over 8 years, the saddle that had belonged to his father, the drawings Maggie had pinned to the wall. Gone. Clara sank to her knees in the dirt and wept. Samuel knelt beside her, holding her, saying nothing. Because there was nothing to say. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd built was ashes. And yet when Clara finally lifted her head, she saw her children climbing down from the wagon. She saw Will helping his siblings, steady and calm. She saw Maggie holding Sarah's hand. She saw Jake carrying Daniel, struggling under the weight, but refusing to give up. They were alive. They were together. They were home. The barn could be rebuilt. The animals could be replaced. But her children, her family, her love, those were irreplaceable. And those Ezra hadn't touched. Clara wiped her face, stood up, took a deep breath. "We'll rebuild," she said. Samuel looked at her. "Clara, we'll rebuild. Tomorrow. We'll start tomorrow." She turned to her children, her voice strong. "Tonight we rest. Tomorrow we work. That's what we do. That's who we are." Will nodded, his face determined. "Yes, Mama." "Yes, Mama," the others echoed. Clara looked at Samuel, her husband, her partner, her home. "Together," she said. He took her hand. Together. The rebuilding started at dawn. Clara woke to the sound of hammering. She rose from the pallet they'd made on the cabin floor, stepping carefully over sleeping children, and walked to the window. Samuel was in the yard pulling charred timber from the wreckage. His movements were slow, mechanical, the work of a man who refused to stop even when stopping made sense. She pulled on her shawl and went outside. "You should be resting," she said. "Your ribs are bruised. The doctor said." The doctor said a lot of things. Samuel didn't stop working. "Animals need shelter. Can't wait for my ribs to heal." Clara picked up a piece of burned wood and tossed it onto the pile. "Then I'll help." "Clara, don't." She met his eyes. "Don't tell me to go inside. Don't tell me to rest. I'm your wife. This is our ranch, our loss, our rebuild." Samuel looked at her for a long moment. Then something in his face softened, and he handed her a pair of work gloves. "Fair enough." They worked side by side as the sun rose higher. The children woke and joined them one by one, even little Sarah, who carried small pieces of debris to the burn pile with solemn determination. By mid-morning, the yard was full. Clara looked up from her work to see wagons pulling in. 1, then 2, then 5. Ranchers from neighboring properties. The doctor and his wife. The shopkeeper who'd been cold to her months ago, now carrying tools and lumber in the back of his cart. "What is this?" Clara asked. Mrs. Harriet Cole climbed down from the lead wagon, her face set with purpose. "This is a barn-raising child. Did you think we'd let you rebuild alone?" Clara's throat closed up. "I don't understand. After everything that happened, the gossip, the talk is cheap." Harriet took her hands. "We saw what that man did. We saw what you faced. And we saw how you stood up for your children, how your boy spoke in that courtroom like a grown man." She squeezed Clara's fingers. "This town hasn't always been kind to you. But towns can change. People can change." Clara couldn't speak, could only nod, tears streaming down her face. The work began in earnest. Men hauled lumber and measured frames. Women set up tables with food and water. Children ran messages back and forth, their laughter mixing with the sounds of saws and hammers. Will worked alongside the men, his young face serious with concentration. Samuel showed him how to hold the beams steady, how to drive nails true, how to work as part of a team instead of carrying everything alone. Clara watched them together, her husband and her son, and felt something heal in a place she hadn't known was still broken. By sunset, the frame of the new barn stood against the sky. It wasn't finished. Would take weeks yet to complete. But it was there, solid and real proof that destruction wasn't the end of the story. The neighbors stayed for dinner, a potluck of whatever everyone had brought. They sat in the yard eating and talking and laughing while the children chased fireflies in the fading light. Samuel found Clara standing apart, watching it all with wonder in her eyes. "You okay?" "I don't know what I am." She shook her head. 6 months ago I was digging frozen ground with my bare hands. Now I have this. All of this. How does that happen? You survived. Samuel put his arm around her. You kept going when anyone else would have quit. And eventually the world noticed. I didn't do it alone. No, you didn't. He turned her to face him. But you took the first step. You let me help. You let them help. He nodded toward the crowd. That's the hardest part, Clara. Not the work. Letting people in. She leaned into him, breathing in the smell of sawdust and sweat and home. I'm glad I let you in, she whispered. Me too. They stood there until the stars came out, surrounded by community, surrounded by family, surrounded by love. 3 weeks later, the barn was finished. It was bigger than the old one, sturdier, built by many hands instead of just 2. Samuel had added a loft for hay storage and a special stall for Will's horse, the skittish mare he'd been training all summer. They held a small celebration to mark its completion. Nothing fancy, just the family gathered in the new structure, marveling at what they'd created together. It smells different, Jake announced, sniffing the air. New. It'll smell like horse soon enough, Samuel said, ruffling the boy's hair. Maggie had made a drawing of the new barn and pinned it to the wall right where her old drawings had hung. For luck, she said shyly. Sarah placed her wooden horse on a shelf by the door. So, she can watch over the real ones. Clara walked through the space, slowly running her hand along the smooth beams. So much loss had led to this moment. So much pain. But here now, standing in a barn built by neighbors who had learned to see her, she felt something she'd never expected to feel again. Whole. There's something I need to tell you, she said quietly to Samuel. He turned, concern flickering across his face. What is it? Clara took his hand and placed it on her stomach. I think we're going to need to build another room onto the cabin. Samuel stared at her. His hand trembled against her belly. Clara, are you saying... I'm saying we're having a baby. She smiled through sudden tears. A new beginning. For all of us. Samuel made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. A baby, he whispered. Our baby. Our baby. He pulled back to look at her face, his eyes wet. I thought after Mary Ellen, I never thought I'd... I know. Clara touched his cheek. I know. The children had gathered around, sensing something important. What's happening? Will asked. Is something wrong? Clara looked at her son, her strong, brave boy who had carried so much for so long. Nothing's wrong, she said. Everything's right. You're going to have a new brother or sister. The silence lasted half a second. Then Jake whooped so loud the birds flew from the rafters. Maggie burst into tears and hugged Clara's legs. Sarah smiled her quiet smile and clutched her wooden horse. Daniel, now walking confidently, toddled over and patted Clara's knee, like he understood completely. Will stood back watching. His face was unreadable. Clara went to him. Will, what are you thinking? I'm thinking. He paused, swallowed hard. I'm thinking that this baby is lucky. Really lucky. Why's that? Because it's going to grow up with a real family. With parents who love each other. With brothers and sisters who look out for each other. His voice cracked. It's going to grow up safe. Clara pulled him into her arms. Her boy who had never been allowed to be just a boy. Her child who had learned fear before he learned his ABCs. "You're safe too," she whispered. "You know that, right? You're safe now. You can stop carrying the weight." Will's shoulders shook. He cried, really cried for the first time since Thomas died. Clara held him and let him. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is finally let yourself be weak. The pregnancy progressed through fall and into winter. Clara's body changed, grew heavy with new life, but she refused to stop working entirely. She compromised with Samuel lighter chores, more rest, no lifting, but she wouldn't be confined to bed like some fragile doll. "I've had 5 babies," she reminded him when he fussed. "I know what my body can handle." 6 babies, he corrected. "And this one's mine too. I get to worry. You get to worry quietly. From over there." He laughed, but he still watched her like she might break at any moment. The children adapted to the coming change in their own ways. Will became even more helpful, taking on chores without being asked. Maggie drew picture after picture of the baby, each one different, imagining what it might look like. Jake talked to Clara's stomach constantly, telling the baby elaborate stories about the chickens and the horses and the time he found a frog in his boot. Sarah was quietest about it. She would sit beside Clara sometimes, her hand resting gently on the swell of Clara's belly, just feeling the baby move. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked her one evening. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I hope it's a girl." "Why's that?" "So I won't be the littlest sister anymore." A pause. "And so she can play with my horse." Clara's heart clenched. This child who had been so broken, so silent, so afraid was thinking about sharing her most precious possession with a sibling she hadn't even met. "That's very kind of you, sweetheart." Sarah looked up at her with serious eyes. "Family shares. That's what Samuel says." "He's right." Sarah nodded, satisfied, and went back to feeling the baby kick. Christmas came and went, quiet but warm. They didn't have much for presents. The fire had consumed their savings, along with everything else, but Clara made do. New clothes sewn from salvaged fabric. Wooden toys Samuel carved in the evenings when he thought no one was watching. A special dinner with a goose one of the neighbors had given them. The children didn't complain about the modest celebration. They'd learned long ago that presents mattered more than presents. After dinner, they gathered by the fire. Samuel read from his worn Bible the same passages his mother had read to him as a child. Clara listened with her head on his shoulder, her hand on her belly, feeling their baby shift and turn inside her. "What should we name it?" Jake asked suddenly. "The baby, I mean. Have you thought about names?" Clara and Samuel exchanged glances. "We've discussed a few," Clara admitted. "If it's a boy," Samuel said slowly, "we thought maybe Thomas." Clara tensed. Her late husband's name. A complicated choice. "Not to honor him," Samuel continued, reading her face, "but to reclaim it. To prove that a name doesn't have to carry the weight of the man who bore it before." Will nodded slowly. "I like that." "And if it's a girl?" Maggie asked. Clara smiled. "Hope." The word hung in the air, simple and profound. "Hope," Sarah whispered, testing it out. "Hope Brennan," Jake added. "That sounds nice." "It sounds perfect," Will said quietly. Clara looked around at her family, her 5 children, her husband, the fire crackling warm and steady, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. Whatever this baby turned out to be, it would be born into love. It would never know fear as its first language. It would grow up seeing what family could be when family was done right. That was the greatest gift she could give. The labor started on a February night. Clara woke to the first cramp around midnight, familiar pressure low in her belly. She lay still for a while, breathing through it, counting the time between pains. "Samuel!" She shook his shoulder. "It's time." He was up instantly, years of ranch emergencies training him to wake fast. "How far apart?" Maybe 10 minutes. We have time. I'll get the doctor. Send Will. You stay with me. Samuel hesitated, clearly torn between the need to act and the need to stay. Samuel. Clara grabbed his hand. Stay. He stayed. Will rode for the doctor with a determination that would have frightened Clara if she'd been able to think about anything except the contractions rolling through her body. Maggie took charge of the younger children, herding them into the far corner of the cabin with quiet efficiency. Is Mama going to be okay? Jake's voice trembled. Mama's strong, Maggie said firmly. She's the strongest person I know. Clara heard them through the haze of pain and felt a surge of love so intense it almost broke her. The labor was long, as labors often are. Hours passed in a blur of contractions and breathing, and Samuel's steady voice talking her through each wave. You're doing so well, he said over and over. You're almost there. Just a little more. Dr. Abernathy arrived near dawn, his bag in hand, his face calm with experience. He examined Clara quickly, efficiently. Baby's in position. Everything looks good. Won't be long now. It wasn't. The sun was just rising when Clara felt the final urge to push. She bore down with everything she had, every ounce of strength she'd built over a lifetime of survival. And then a cry. Thin and strong and perfect. It's a girl, Dr. Abernathy announced. A beautiful, healthy girl. He placed the baby on Clara's chest. She was tiny, wrinkled, red-faced, with the indignation of being born. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her fists clenched, her voice raised in protest against this cold, bright world. Clara had never seen anything so beautiful. "Hello, Hope," she whispered. "Welcome home." Samuel leaned over them both, his face wet with tears. His hand trembled as he touched the baby's cheek. "She's perfect," he breathed. "Clara, she's perfect." "She is." The children crept closer one by one. Will, first, his face soft with wonder. Then Maggie, then Jake, then Sarah, carrying Daniel on her hip. They crowded around the bed, staring at their new sister, like she was made of starlight. "She's so small," Jake whispered. "She'll grow," Clara said, smiling. "Can I hold her?" Maggie asked. "Soon. Let me have her just a little longer first." Sarah reached out one careful finger and touched Hope's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around hers, instinctive, trusting. "She knows me," Sarah said, her voice full of wonder. "She knows all of you." Clara looked at her family, her beautiful, improbable family. "She's been listening to your voices for months. She knows she's loved." Samuel sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Clara, his hand resting on their daughter. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For everything. For staying. For trusting me. For giving me." He gestured at the room, at the children, at the life they'd built. "For giving me all of this." Clara leaned into him, exhausted but complete. "We gave it to each other." Spring came early that year. The snow melted fast, the creeks ran high, and the land turned green almost overnight. Clara stood on the porch, Hope bundled in her arms, watching her family scatter across the property like seeds finding fertile ground. Will was in the paddock working with his mare. She'd trusted him completely now, following him without a lead rope, responding to his voice like he was speaking her language. Maggie sat by the garden, sketching the first wildflowers. She'd started selling her drawings in town, small pieces that tourists bought as souvenirs. The money wasn't much, but the pride on her face was worth more than gold. Jake was attempting to teach Daniel to collect eggs, a process that involved more chasing chickens than collecting anything. Their laughter rang across the yard, pure and uncomplicated. Sarah was playing with her wooden horse in the dirt, making up stories under her breath. She talked now freely and often, like the words had been waiting inside her all along. And Samuel was walking toward the house, his hat pushed back, his face creased with a smile. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, climbing the porch steps. I'm thinking about how different everything is. Different good or different bad? Different good, different impossible. Clara shifted hope to her other arm. A year ago, I was trying to bury a man in frozen ground with my bare hands. I had nothing, less than nothing. And now? She looked at him. This man who had stopped when anyone else would have ridden past. This man who had offered help without conditions, without expectations, without hidden cruelty behind his kindness. And now I have everything, she said simply. Samuel took her free hand. So do I. They stood there watching their children holding their future. I never thanked you properly, Clara said after a while. For what? For that first day. For seeing me. For saying those words. Which words? Clara smiled, remembering. The frozen field. The impossible wait. The stranger who became her salvation. Come with me, she said softly. Please. Samuel's breath caught. You remember that? I remember everything about that day. I remember thinking you were crazy, or dangerous, or both. She paused. And then I remember thinking that maybe, just maybe, you were something else entirely. What's that? A second chance. Clara turned to face him fully. You were my second chance, Samuel, at life, at love, at everything. He pulled her close, careful of the baby between them. You were mine too, he said against her hair. I was dead inside Clara, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. And then you showed up stubborn and scared and so damn strong, and you woke something in me I thought was gone forever. Hope made a small sound, and they both looked down at her. She was awake, her dark eyes moving between their faces, like she was memorizing them. What do you think she sees? Clara asked. Home, Samuel said. She sees home. Clara nodded slowly. That was exactly right. Home wasn't a place. It wasn't a cabin or a ranch or a piece of land. Home was the people you chose, the family you built, the love you fought for and won. Home was standing on this porch with a man who had saved her. Home was watching her children grow into the people they were meant to be. Home was holding her daughter and knowing with absolute certainty that this child would never know the fear that had defined Clara's own life. Home was here. Home was now. Home was them. The sun climbed higher. The children's laughter grew louder. Samuel's arm stayed warm around Clara's shoulders, and Clara McAllister Brennan, who had once believed she would die in a frozen field with nothing but grief to show for her life, stood in the spring sunshine and felt something she had stopped believing in years ago. She felt happy, not the fragile, fearful happiness that waits for the other shoe to drop, not the desperate happiness of someone who knows good things never last. Real happiness, solid happiness, the kind that comes from knowing you've built something that can't be broken, that you found people who can't be lost, that you finally come home. Will looked up from the paddock and waved. Maggie held up her latest drawing for approval. Jake and Daniel collapsed in the grass, giggling. Sarah ran toward the porch, her wooden horse clutched in one hand, her face bright with something to tell. Samuel kissed Clara's forehead and went to lift Sarah into his arms. And Clara stood there holding hope, watching her family, and knew with every fiber of her being that this was what she'd been surviving for. All those years of pain, all those years of fear, all those years of holding on by her fingernails, refusing to give up, refusing to lie down, refusing to let the world win. It had led here, to this porch, this family, this life. It had all been worth it. Clara pressed a kiss to Hope's downy head and whispered the only words that mattered. Welcome home, little one. You're safe now. You're loved. And you always will be. The wind carried her words across the ranch, mixing with laughter and birdsong and the steady rhythm of a family finding its way. And somewhere in the distance, spring kept arriving, green and new and full of promise. The story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. But for Clara, for Samuel, for Will and Maggie and Jake and Sarah and Daniel and Hope, for this family built from broken pieces and held together by love, this moment was enough. This moment was everything. This moment was home.